And so at this point, we will turn it over to our next speaker, who is Lindsay Betzendahl.
Hello.
Hello there, Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining us today. You may know her as Zendal Data, and Lindsay is going to share with us her talk, and I am like so excited about it. You know, Lindsay, one of the things that I sent Lindsay a Twitter message this morning, or posted a tweet, because my husband sent me a screenshot and said, somehow this got into my Twitter feed. And it was Lindsay's recent visualization.
I don't know how that happened.
Thank you, Twitter, for sharing data. So it's just like infecting everywhere. So
the future.
So Lindsay, I'll just pass it right on to you.
Sure. All right. Let's see if I can do. Okay. All right. You're good? All right, awesome. Thank you. I am so excited to be able to share this. So this is called Dashboarding in Reverse, a little lesson in design fluidity. And this is really about my personal philosophy about how I go about designing dashboards and just some of the creative methods that I use to quote dashboard in reverse. The whole point of the talk is to challenge you to think about your overall process of how you transform your data from numbers and strings and rows and columns into a beautiful dashboard that can either tell a story or spark an insight or drive a decision. And I will share a lot of examples about what I've done or how I approach design in my personal work. But this can be applied to like your work as well when applicable. So the goal is really to consider what artistic path, if any, is yours to follow. It's about how you create a visual for others to interpret, interact with, learn from, and be inspired by, and how you can find your inner artist. I think so. There we go. Okay. So a little bit about me. I'm Lindsay Betzendahl, and I'll just share a little bit about maybe why it matters. Well, it doesn't really matter. The details probably don't matter at all about who I am, but let me share some facts anyhow. So I've been working in healthcare for about 14 years and using Tableau for about 4.5, and Tableau Public for about 2.5 years I've been publishing there, and really only active in the last year, which is where I've kind of solidified my design process. Also some facts. I'm not an artist, not at least in the usual definition of things. I can't draw for the life of me. I can, however, create stories and metaphors and make visual connections. I write poetry from time to time, and I used to be a marriage and family therapist where I helped people find their own voice and tell their own stories. So I'm really here to just tell you that it doesn't matter what your background or what your skills may be, but this talk is about learning to listen to your inner design voice. So lastly, what are some truths? I love data. I love colors and color palettes. I love how things fit together, both conceptually, physically, metaphorically. I love stories and storytelling. And I assume that many of you listening, either right now or in the future, will also share some of those profound loves and truths, no matter what your background may be. So some of the objectives for this talk is I'm going to share what is dashboard design at its core. What is this dashboarding in reverse? I'm going to give a little analogy to art and how we can kind of apply that to our data design process, how to find inspiration, and then I'll give some examples of where I've done this. So how we're usually taught. So Tableau is great. So when we learn Tableau or any other data visualization tool, we learn it usually in a linear progression where we take our data and we make those into worksheets and charts or what have you. We put those into dashboards and then into a storytelling. Tableau even organizes their platform in the exact same process where you'll see they start with the data source, they progress you through making sheets, worksheets, dashboards. It makes complete sense. I mean, you really do need these fundamentals to build upon each other. You need to take the data, look at it, interpret it, make calculations and aggregation, understand it, choose your chart types and aggregations, then perhaps position them in containers with interactivity on a dashboard, maybe with some clever titles, maybe some text for context, and maybe adding all that together to make some type of story or insight. But the challenge is, does it always have to go from point A to Z? from here to there? Can we use data and design to go from Z to A, perhaps? Is that possible? Can we start where we usually end and work backwards? Can we start in the middle? And what if we have a story, perhaps, before we even have the graphs? Or maybe a story before we even have the data, something that we really want to share with the world, and a concept that we don't have the graphs of the data for quite yet. So the reality is that, yes, of course we can do that. But let's first start with that it's really important to have a linear progression. It's helpful to be able to understand and create dashboards appropriately. So the fundamentals are extremely important. And I want to stress this because while the remaining 20 minutes of this talk will be a lot about design and creativity. But I just want to highlight this particularly first. When I first learned Tableau, I initially learned it just by practicing with data that I was familiar with, created simple lines, scatter plots, bar charts, simple things, just to understand data and how to do things correctly or by best practices. So you really need to have a foundation of solid chart types and understanding the best practices of how to use those charts and when to use them. Same with all other aspects of creating worksheets and calculations and things of that nature. So it's also important to understand how to build a dashboard correctly, how to use containers, how to layer objects, what options do you have for text, aligning, padding, filters, actions, all those important pieces. So I think in business, or often where we work, it's really imperative to be building these things based on the data or the question that someone has that they want to have answered. But I'd argue that once you have these fundamentals and you understand how Tableau functions and what it's capable of, that you could break out of this linear mold and perhaps move into a more fluid state of dashboard design. So let's imagine instead that you can enter dashboard design at any place along the process. So in a cyclical fashion, there's really no beginning or end, just an infinite number of starting and ending places. And perhaps because I'm maybe more comfortable with design than I am with data, I like to start at the end, sometimes in the middle, and plenty of time to obviously start in the beginning and go through and start with the data and work in a linear progression. But the point is that it's fluid and individualized, both for me as a person, but for you as a person, and also for each project that you work on. So what can we learn from art? So let me quickly give you an analogy. Oops. So let's imagine that you are the potter, you're the artist, which is the data analyst, the dashboard designer, whatever your role is. Your clay is your data. That's the stuff that you have so much of it, it's so complicated or not, and you need to work it. And your hands are the calculations and the charts that you'll mold together and build into worksheets. The wheel is your dashboard, it's your canvas. It will drive your eventual result. The size of it, the speed of it are all going to determine what your end art piece is going to look like. Then you have your glaze, which is your design. Those are the small details like your color, your data to ink ratio, your fonts, things like that. And your pottery is your story. That's the overarching goal, vision, or inspiration. So let's take two scenarios just to drive this analogy home. So you can come into the studio and first start with, I'm going to pick how much clay that you want to work with. You're choosing your data first. Then let's say you follow the normal course of action. You decide determining how fast you want your wheel to move, the flow of your cupped hands around the clay, your worksheets, kind of how you're going to mold that together. Once you've moved the clay around to a shape you like, let's say that's the layout of the dashboard, a certain type of pot, perhaps, and then you finally choose the glaze afterward that looks best for what you've just molded. And then you fire it away and you're all done. Great, beautiful. How about another scenario? You could walk into the same studio and suddenly, like I usually am, totally distracted by some beautiful glaze that's like showing on some other piece of pottery or the samples or whatever. I'm like, that's pretty. So let's say you start there. You really like all these different shimmers and colors and textures and weights, and you pick one that resonates with you. That is the dashboard colors, the fonts, the layout. There's something else that sparked what you're going to design. You think about the shape of the pot that best is going to fit that glaze. Maybe it's a pearly white, sounds good for a plate. Maybe it's a beautiful blue-green, I'd like it as a coffee cup. So since you know what you're going to make, let's say that it is a coffee cup, You know exactly how much clay to throw on your wheel, how much data to use. So both methods result in a beautiful art piece, but they both take very different approaches. And so this is just a little bit about kind of the concept of dashboarding in reverse. It's just that you're starting at a different place than the typical progression. So it's still thinking through the story of your data, but maybe it's laying out the size of your dashboard first, or picking out the color of the font you want first. But ultimately, it's about your design process and finding the inspiration that you're going to build upon. So inspiration is the process of being mentally stimulated to do or feel something, especially to do something creative. As I've said, the nature of the talk is about challenging the typical trajectory of dashboard design. For me, it's just as simple as I start where I'm inspired. So it can be anything. It could be a color palette I see, could be an image that I search for, an infographic, a particular font or an alignment of font, a chart type that I either want to try, haven't tried, or just want to do today, or a new technique that perhaps I haven't tried before, maybe something I picked up somewhere along my travels, or something I saw in Tableau Public. Any of these things might jog my inspirative juices. So let's start with colors. So colors are probably my favorite thing about dashboard design, and rightfully so. There's a lot of psychology behind colors and how we respond to them and how we feel towards them. Colors can often make or break a dashboard. The wrong color can evoke perhaps an emotion in your user that you didn't intend, or too much color can be distracting. So I find this very an important piece of dashboard design. And Tableau obviously has a large selection of wonderful color palettes, but we often need other colors as data artists, either for particular projects or for personal projects, something that's going to resonate with the data that we're using. So here are just a couple online resources for color generators, but there's a ton out there. But one of my favorite resources is good old Google, because if I don't have a color idea, I actually just Google the topic of my data, usually plus the word infographic, which sounds a little silly, but come up with a lot of different ideas. So here's an example. Recently, for my Project Health Viz initiative, I was looking at the CDC data on disease outbreaks in the US. And I had already actually worked through the data a bit, and I knew I was going to focus on salmonella outbreaks. So before I even started making my charts, I Googled salmonella infographic. Now, I didn't have to actually look for the exact type of topic that I was going to be visiting, but I found this, and for whatever reason, I was drawn to some of the aspects of it, particularly some of the colors, which I really wouldn't have normally picked when thinking about a disease outbreak. So here's my resulting viz. And because I found two colors in here I liked, I really liked that orange and that, teal, and decided I wanted to use those. But that color really drove the rest of my decisions on this visualization. Because I picked two colors and I decided I didn't want to make an entire palette, I had to pick charts that were only going to be one color, or at a max 2 colors. And I had to lay all this out appropriately. So it really drove the rest of my design. Images are another thing kind of similar to colors because they do bring a lot of color perhaps to your dashboard. This, first of all, let me say that images are definitely not necessary in visualizations and often are probably shouldn't be in them. But they really can add to your story and design if they're appropriate and if they're done correctly. And they should feel as if they add an integral part of to your story, maybe something emotional or something that pulls somebody in to look at it. I do say pay for your images or give appropriate credit, just as a little plug. I do have a Shutterstock account because I think it's important to use images appropriately if I ever need to, but there's plenty of other places you can get them for free. So in this example, I actually searched for the image first on this Makeover Monday viz. Didn't mean I was going to use one or not, but it was just where I started. I don't know, I was going to get my creativity flowing. I stumbled upon this one, and given the nature of the topic, like the polarizing aspect of politics, I really was drawn to this one. Here's President Trump. It's all black with this interesting neon teal, what have you, that I really wouldn't have normally picked for him or for a visualization in general, but I did. What happened was it drove the rest of this design. I don't usually make black background visualizations. So when I picked this, it gave me this idea of this split screen black and white viz, which I wouldn't have done without having picked this image. So I really went with it, and it inspired the rest of the clean design on one side. And it even has like a tree map that doesn't have any color in it, which is kind of unusual, but I kind of went with all these different ideas and took some liberties to try to put this together. So here's an example of Kevin Flerlich's O Night Divine that he recently put out. And I was speaking to him about how he was inspired by finding this particular image. Turns out he was working on a radial bar chart, and in doing so, it looked like the North Star. So here's an example of trying a chart out. It looked like something, got an idea. He searched for an image, and he found this one, which then resulted in the rest of the dashboard coming together with the topic of the data, which I think are the words in the Bible, and making the stars. I could imagine that this would not have looked anywhere near as beautiful without this image, because it drove this whole aspect of the night sky. And perhaps you could visualize text in many other different ways, but it might not have been this. He might not have chosen this way. So again, just an idea of how an image can drive the rest of your idea, both in the design and even what data set you pick. So infographics, as I've sort of alluded to, they're really any visual image that displays data. It can be graphs, images, text, creative drawings, what have you. It's a pretty loosely. So I do, as I said, I do look for infographics a lot. Here was an example recently that David Velica's Throwback Data Thursday over Thanksgiving. And for whatever reason, this data set was turkey production and value. And I had that, it was not even a challenging data set. I had the hardest time figuring out what to do. So when I don't have an idea on my own, again, I'll look out for some other creative inspiration. I came across this infographic on turkey thawing, and a couple things where I was drawn to. I was drawn to the idea of using a light and a heavy font, the lines that were separating sections with some text in between, and the color. Now I also knew maybe I wanted to be a little cheeky and use a turkey. So I found this other this other image. I didn't want to buy that one, so I made it in PowerPoint instead and was able to use that. And here's my ending visualization. And again, so the process was really looking for some ideas, getting some pieces of the aspect and putting them together. And then, you know, the rest of things kind of flowed together once I had some ideas together. So inspiration, you can find these types of things in many places. Google and Pinterest are two easy places to search for infographic type ideas. And there's some websites that tend to have more infographic like data visualizations that I often refer to. Tableau Public is also just a wonderful place to look for inspiration. There's some people who, in my opinion, make more infographic-like visualizations. So Pablo Gomez has a ton of beautiful visualizations out there. And this one is actually quite simple in terms of what it's visualizing. Even the chart types are quite simple. But you'll see there's some really great aspects of how he splits out things with the title, like age and gender, and a line, or even some of the images, but they're all really connected together. So I may look at this and say, I never thought about doing a dark header with some white text and a little box as my subtitle to kind of begin my visualization. Maybe I'll try like that piece of it. So there's a lot of inspiration to just even take little pieces of things that you see out there. So let's talk about fonts and alignment a little bit. So data can often drive a font choice. So in this top right example, David Velica, he did a vaccination of measles and used a very interesting font that was very specific. It really draws you in about, wow, that could be what measles looks like. That's pretty interesting and impactful. So if you're going for a more playful design, choosing a particular custom font can be useful. I use custom fonts sparingly because I do like Tableau's own fonts. I think they're pretty good. But if I do, I'll search on font space for a font, download and install it, and then usually create a text in PowerPoint, put it in Tableau as an image. At work, I usually don't use custom fonts or anything, but I think it's just something that sometimes can be inspiring. But I don't want people to forget that there's also the aspect of just using fonts by using italics and bold or different sizes or even alignment that can be just a different design aspect. So in this bottom right, we have Simon Beaumont's visualization where he has a lot of vertically aligned text, both the title and some of the subtitle information, which you don't always see a lot. I think he does it a bit. I find it very interesting, and sometimes I'll just pull that out of my back pocket and say, you know what? I want to create a viz where I have some vertical alignment, and that'll kind of drive maybe how I lay out my dashboard. So new chart types. These are things that sometimes you see along your way and put them in your back pocket, as I've said, for another time where you think, you know what, I want to try to do that chart type that I've never done that someone else did. So Kevin Flerlage's Modern Slavery Viz is pretty well known. I had seen that long ago and kind of just never thought like I'm going to recreate that exact thing or anything. But when I was working on a Makeover Monday visualization for the ecological footprint, it just so happened to have a couple pieces of data and a lot of different countries. And I thought maybe this would be a way for me to challenge myself to use some type of circular chart type and a trellis chart, which both I hadn't done prior. So I often use these opportunities to try to challenge myself with new chart types. Rosario had also done a wonderful blog on coloring between the lines. I knew I wanted to do that at some point, and it wasn't until the data presented it to me that I said, you know what, I'm going to use this technique, this chart type, for this data set. And that really, again, it drove my design process because I already had a chart type in mind that I wanted to challenge myself to use. And a quick tip, I often favorite vizzes on Tableau Public as a way to keep track of charts and techniques that I'm hoping to come back to at some point and try on my own. So if you don't ever favorite stuff, I do it sometimes for that purpose, more like a catalog. And along the same lines, so for chart inspiration, you know, again, trying a new chart. Here's an example of Matt Chambers and then Rodrigo Coloni kind of mirroring his history of the NFL and finding a chart type that he probably hadn't tried before and found a reason or an opportunity to use it as well for a different data set, but both using sports. So I think it's good to challenge yourself, and that can drive, again, your dashboard. New techniques. So this is one of my favorite ways to, well, maybe aside from color, one of my favorite ways to be inspired is I find, you know, people do amazing things every day in Tableau and Tableau Public, and find creative ways to solve problems. And if it's something I haven't done before, I always want to try to find a time or an opportunity to use it, because it's more that the more you learn, the more you try, the better you get. So I had seen this idea from Simon where he created this reference line between two icons in his Formula One viz. And he does write about it on his blog. And I'd also remembered another situation. He used this triangle shape in a bar chart. Like, it could be simple things, but you know, just when I'm losing some inspiration, I'm like, you know, I'm going to try something new. And it makes me feel energized about the dashboard that I'm creating. So I use both of these techniques in my dashboard to the right, where I used the triangle to show a state's progress compared to a median, as well as percentile ranges. And then on the very far right, I gave each state, this is for a HEDIS measure, a grade. And then I used Simon's reference line to separate the grade from the actual value. So as I said, Tableau Public is also a wonderful place to get some ideas to help you dashboard in reverse. And so obviously for all the reasons we discussed, but, you know, again, design, layout, colors, data sources, even dashboard size. This is another one where sometimes I've found people who use an obscure or really big or maybe really long or, you know, what have you, dashboard size. And I'm thinking, you know, I haven't done that in a while, and just jogs my memory of, let me try to challenge myself to do a dashboard of a particular size, or for mobile even, which I don't do often. I don't do in my regular job. So sometimes I challenge myself to do that in public. Also, there's text to graph ratio, things like that. interesting techniques. And of course, for all these things, you can now do attribution, which I think is great for sharing where you're getting your design and inspiration from. Here's an example from Chantilly, which I just thought was a beautiful dashboard. And, you know, I'm not sure there was many pieces that I was drawn to. But I ended up creating a viz that looks very similar, even though it's a completely different data set with actually different graphs entirely. But I liked the colors. I liked some of her layout. I liked her concept of how she flowed through with some of this text and separated things. And there were little pieces that I took out. And I've shared this with Chantilly before. But I think there's so many opportunities in Tableau Public to drive some inspiration in how you think through data that you have. In this particular one, or sometimes often, I'll have some challenges thinking, like, how do I want to visualize this? But if I can get a little hook on something that inspires me, so this was kind of the color scheme first, since it worked with what I was visualizing of global child mortality. But then there were some other aspects of layout that Chantilly's viz drove some of my design. So, in summary, so you can find your own inspiration, and you can start wherever you want in that process that works for you. And you can tell your own stories. You know, I think one of the great things about using dashboards and Tableau is that one data set can tell so many stories, and we see that in Tableau Public all the time. And you can dashboard in reverse. You can dashboard forward. It doesn't matter. As long as you're doing it responsibly and following some of the standard fundamentals that you have. And I think you are capable of creative design. We all are. And lastly, you're the beholder of your own art. Your dashboard is your dashboard. And if you think it's beautiful and you think it tells the story you want to tell, then that is what it does. And that, I think, is really important for us all to remember. So that's it. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's any questions.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay. Oh my gosh, that was so good. I'm looking through. We don't have anything in the Q&A right now, but let's just give it a second to see if anything pops up.
Cool.
Lots of thanks. That's what
everybody. Thank you.
That was really great. There were, I think, a lot of great tips there, especially like Googling or Pinterest, some of that stuff where, you know, like I use Pinterest different, like I use it to find recipes, but I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I could use it for that.
I actually don't. Zach Geis had told me that. It's like, that's a great idea to like kind of catalog all your things. So
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your information today. It was great. And then we can take like a minute to plug some projects. So you've got Project Health Biz that you've, and you've recently had a new one that came out, right?
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, Project Health Biz is just a social initiative to visualize healthcare. I put out a data set once a month. You can probably see it on Twitter. I put it out on data.world. But I just put out the Social Security birth rates. So that just came out just this week. So hopefully people want to join in and share your healthcare visits with me. It's been fun. Thank you.
We have another quick question. Do you ever merge your poetry with data?
So that's a great one. I actually did that once. I did end up visualizing one of my poems. I hadn't written in many, I don't know if it's been years or just feels like that, but I got inspired after the conference, after talking with a friend of mine, and ended up writing on the plane home. And then I put it into Tableau. So I actually plotted every single letter. And I actually have another poem that I wrote since then as well that I'm hoping to put into that same Tableau dashboard.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay,
Thanks.
for sharing today. It was great.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right. Now we'll turn it over to Steve Percup. Oh my gosh, I've been practicing this, Steve, and I still
go for it. Come on, Lynn. Come on, let's have a go, Emily.
I know. I get to Procopio.
There you go.
Yes.
There you go. You did it.